Alright, in a minute he's going to start talking about the King James versus the CSB. And he said a lot of nice things on here, and I'm not going to watch the whole video with you, but just the part about him using the King James to compare to the CSB, to me, I think it's childish. And the way Tim Frisk thought it was kind of cute and funny to talk about verses in the King James. Now, let's get it straight. I don't read King James. I read study tools derived from the King James, like the KJVER, things of that nature. I also read the newest version of the King James, which is the SKJV, one of the newest versions of the King James. And you know, of course, my main favorite is the NKJV. I also read the MEV, which is the uses the King James as a base text standard, which is one of the best translations we have in our arsenal right now, between both texts. I don't like when people mention the King James out of place. This video has nothing to do with the King James. The minute they start talking about the King James, I started cussing. Honestly, I kid you not. I immediately got so angry I started cussing because it's unfair. The King James is a Bible that is for a specific group of people in this day and time. And you know what? I give a shout out and a pat on the back and a kiss on the cheek to people that read the King James as their standard translation and don't have no problem with it. I'm not talking about King James onlys. I'm talking about King James advocates, like I'm a new King James advocate, that read from the King James and they have no problem with it. They read it and teach from it. They don't get the archaic words wrong or anything like that. There's hundreds and thousands of people out there like that. I meet them every day. They go to my church. Okay? I'm sick and tired of people hating on the King James. It's apostasy. It's the Antichrist. Stop doing that. Please stop. If the King James, you mean to tell me that out of all these standard translations out there, you needed to use the King James to compare to the CSB to make it look good? I love the CSB. Anyone that's been watching my channel knows that. For them to sit there and make fun of the King James to promote the CSB is a bunch of BS. I'm trying not to cuss. This was wrong. And I'm going to let you hear it. Now, everything else he said was good. He should have left the King James out of it. The King James is behind the glass, basically. There's no reason to even bring it up. Okay? And the CSB is no comparison to the King James. You should have used, first of all, you should be using something in the critical text. You shouldn't even be using the standard text. You should be using something in the critical text like an LSB or NASB. Okay? You shouldn't even be using the TR. And then if you're going to use the TR, you should have been using something like the New King James or the MEV. But no, as much dynamic as the CSB is, they had to go make fun of the King James and act like the King James did something wrong to them. Look, King James onlys, I know, they get dumb and stupid. That has nothing to do with the translation itself. The translation is innocent apart from King James onlyism. It has nothing to do with King James onlyism. King James onlyism is people who make a religion out of the King James. It has nothing to do with the King James itself. The King James reads the way it reads because it was from the time. Go to the old ASV and in the old Revised Standard Version and see how well you can understand it. See if it doesn't show, see if those Bibles don't show archaic words. Go to the Geneva. Go to the Wycliffe, the Great Bible, the Coverdale Bible. Go see if you can understand it like you can understand a CSB, or like you can even understand a New King James for that matter. Go check it out. You'll see that people always going to the King James is a bunch of bullcrap. You shouldn't even be mentioning it in this context. You should only mention it when you're talking about standard translations that are the top sellers in the world. Okay? That's the only time you should mention it. You should not be mentioning it for a dynamic equivalent or optimum equivalent like the CSB. Okay, everybody wants to go up. Well, first of all, let's do better than the King James. The King James, there are many people who love the King James and they read from it and they don't trust your modern day BS. Okay? There's no reason for you to even bring it up. If you have a problem with the King James, why bring it up? Unless you're going to compliment the King James and point out something that the King James said that was wonderful, don't even bring it up. We got too many modern standard text Bibles that try to be like a King James that you can compare a CSB to. You don't need to go to the King James and pick on it. And then Fritz over here on my left is going to sit there and laugh about it. Like the King James purposely was created to clown itself. Look, it said what it said in its time. It's a better version than the 1611 King James before it. It's a better version than the Geneva Bible before. Go read the Geneva Bible. I have one sitting over there. And see if you can understand it like you can understand the King James. It is an update to other Bibles of the TR, just like all your Bibles are updates of each other in the CT. But they stopped at 1769. We're going all the way back to 1769. What's so goddamn funny about that? You're saying this because you want to yell at King James onlyism. Stop mixing King James onlyism with the King James. Those are two totally separate issues. Oh, well, like the King James says, well, the CSB says, that is not even a natural comparison. It makes me mad when people do this. Because I am a TR person, even though I don't read the King James. But the preservation, I'm sorry, but you're not going to change my mind. The preservation belongs to the King James. It's what God gave us. Now we can be as modern and better and more academic and more educational if we think we're all that, all we want to be. But the truth of the matter is the preservation, okay, was shifted in 1769. After 1769, we got Westcott and Hort at 1881. That's when BS started to enter the whole chain of Bible philosophy. And today we're still using BS in our Bible philosophies that we derive from Westcott and Hort. We're still living in 1881. That's ancient. But a lot of our modern Bibles are still in 1881. They still derive from the Alexandrian text. Sure, you did a little bit better and got rid of some of your apostasy and your false religion when you went to the critical text, but you still got the Alexandrian mixed in there. Don't even get me started. I think you need to get up off the King James and compare it to Bibles that are like it. The CSB has nothing to do with the King James, and the King James has nothing to do with the goddamn CSB. God, they make me want to cuss so bad. It pisses me off when people pick on anything Texas Receptus. We were here first, or should I say they were here first. You don't just get to come moons later, okay, and make fun. No, nobody's forcing anybody to read the King James. King James onlyists don't even fellowship with you. You don't have any King James onlyists in your life. You read stuff on the line, or you read stuff, on the internet or whatever. You see videos on YouTube about King James onlyism, claiming that the modern Bibles are attacking the King James. Okay, you have a choice to make right there. There's more of you than there are of them. There's more of y'all than there are of them. There's more people getting on here preaching about what's so good about the critical text every day and don't dare open a goddamn Bible to talk about what it actually says. Where the King James people at least open up a scripture and compare it to another Bible to show you why King James onlyism, in their opinion, is legit. I get so sick and tired of the hypocrisy. Don't be like the King James onlyists. Most people agree, even King James activists agree, the King James onlyists is bullcrap. And nobody is sucking up to it or giving into it. Why are you sitting here hating on King James onlyism by using the King James? That's wrong. That's evil. I'm going to let you hear it. In a little bit, you'll see.
On the Oversight Committee, we also had a great deal of feedback from conservative Lutheran church body, Wisconsin Evangelical Synod. They actually put together a committee devoted to formulating recommendations when the HCSB was converting over to the CSB. So they were happy. Their recommendations were largely followed. So it's and they're coming from a different theological perspective than the Baptists, and so we think we've reached a spot that I'd call it a sweet spot between denominations in that regard. So I think that the hope for the CSB is that more people will discover it across Christendom and will make it their translation and hear God's word speaking to them clearly.
That's great. That's really good to hear. I'm also looking at the live chat, and we do have questions we want to make sure we already planned to cover, but I see people are really interested in this, and so we'll see what we can get to with some of these extra questions. I do think maybe we want to just talk a little bit about the committee itself, how it functions, and what you do as part of the committee. So maybe that would be good to talk about a little bit.
Well, the committee functions. What happens is we have a nice split. About 4 of those scholars I was mentioning before, the core 8, are in Hebrew Bible, Old Testament. So we have 4 in New Testament Christian Scripture. So we'll be all together when we're working on global recommendations for the whole translation. We'll work through that as a group, but then what we'll do is we'll split up into our separate rooms when we're working on our respective testaments. The Old Testament group in one room, New Testament group in another, and then the full group in that room will vet every recommendation put forward. So we had taken the Holman Christian Standard Bible from 2004 as our base translation in creating the CSB, and our aim was to be as conservative as possible. We did introduce some global changes that changed it as a whole, but we wanted to try to conserve that translation as much as possible. And so the results of those labors came out in 2017. We did do a minor set of revisions in 2020, but one of the things we're trying to do now is try to keep that translation. One of the things translations try to do is they try to stay stable because they're marketing it. They want people to be comfortable with the wording and the language. So we were thinking we might do a minor update of the CSB in 2024 or so, 2025, but that was 4 or 5 years ago. But I think we're trying to keep the text stable for now, with the idea that we'll come back and do some tweaks a bit down the road, hopefully not too far down the road.
Okay, that's good, because that was kind of the overarching question that was asked here, was whether there would be a revision coming at some point. So I think you've basically answered that, and we will.
I'm glad that they are not doing any new revisions right now, because I think that's what he said. Because if they do another revision right now, I probably wouldn't like it. I probably would put the CSB over there with the NIV on that side of the room and let it collect dust, because they, you know what I mean. Unless you're going to, I'm not even going to go there. I just think it's time, like, It's time to create the perfect Bible and stop just translating Bibles and updating them to keep them in the market. It's time to make the better Bible and make less translations. That's what I feel. That's my opinion. Okay? It's time to make the Unity Standard Bible. Okay? That's the D. Roy Cruz version. The Unity Standard. We're fine. You want to separate text in the same Bible? Fine. Put the King James renderings in brackets, but put them all there. Okay? Leave them in the text where they belong. Okay? And not just the verses, but the words too. You can put the words in brackets too if you want to. I don't care. Like the Amplified does. Okay? Put the words in brackets too. Okay? We need the Unity Standard version. In other words, both texts unified to create the perfect Bible. That's what we need. But as long as there's just two sides of the wall, the TR wins. I'm taking the side of the TR. Tell you that right now.
We don't necessarily have to get into this now, but we can kind of table this question. It has to do with some of the most significant textual variants or manuscript issues with the CSB translation. So maybe we can, when we get to our textual basis, we might be able to talk about that a little bit in relation to the CSB itself. Let's talk about textual basis. And the King James Version, this is a big issue.
Oh my God, here we go.
People say, well, I use the King James, and one of the main arguments that's given is the textual basis for the King James. So why are the new translations like the CSB so different than the King James in certain ways, aside from the language? Can you speak to that textual issue some?
Yeah, well, we all think that our translation was good enough for Jesus or the Apostle Paul, but you hear that more with the King James Standard translation. It's a great translation. It's a wonderful translation to King James. I can't imagine a better one. It was 1611, but it's dating itself a little bit to 1611, and so there are a couple reasons why modern translations, not just the CSB but others as well, why they're departing from the King James. One of the problems is just that the language is dating itself, and so modern readers, especially as the King James is not norming, let's say, our modern English as much as it had.
There's only a handful of us compared to the millions of us and thousands of us that are departing from the King James. I never was a King James Pro reader. I went from, everybody that's been watching my channel knows I went from Living Bible to NIV to New King James. The King James in there, I've had two King James Bible in my total life, which my mom was a King James reader because she felt she had to be, because we grew up in a King James church. My mom had a King James, but she read more commentary than she read the text itself. My mom had a whole bookshelf full of commentary, okay, and that's how she studied the Bible. She didn't really gravitate the text enough. But, she, left behind some King James Bibles that I used because, she left behind some good ones, and one of them was brand new, and I told you the story about how I marked up that Bible and somebody collected it, even with all my, with my name, permanent markered on it and everything, and they gave it to me and I gave it back, I think I did, or else I lost it in I lost it in my ex-wife's old house that she had to evacuate from. I forget what happened to that Bible. But I really didn't want to take it because I wasn't really reading from it. All I would be doing is just looking at my, old notes and stuff in it. But at that time I was real versed in the New King James. I really wasn't planning on shifting away from the New King James and going back in time to the King James. Okay? But I've always been a TR person. And the New King James have helped me stick with the TR. It does not deviate away from the TR to the point to where you feel like you need to throw away a King James. But it is more academic and more understandable than the King James. However, the King James, a lot of people are still reading from it, and this guy is allowing, you can hear the KJVO in his voice, where he's thinking of King James onlyism. He's not thinking of the King James Version as a separate translation that happens to be the beginning of all these Bibles. That's where the preservation stopped at. That's where the preservation paused at, right there. At the King James 1769, my bad. 1769. That's where the preservation paused at. We got another quick shot of it with the New King James in 1984. Okay? That is the only preservation that we have, other than that and the MEV and the SKJV, Nick Sayers' SKJV, the 21st Century King James, blah, 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 blah. There's been different editions of the King James, but none of them are translations other than the New King James and the MEV. They're all just editions where they deal with some poetry and stuff like that. But they most of them keep the archaic words in there. Okay? But we're past, first of all, the King James. We're now reading, a lot of people are going to gravitate towards the SKJV when they realize that the SKG is literally a King James version that is more closer to the King James than anything else that's been translated as King James. But a lot of cultists, KJV only cultists, won't trust any other Bible, but yet they want to talk about it and constantly fuss about it like they don't trust the King James Bible either. I think everybody needs to quit bringing up the King James in a negative way on both sides. And I think everybody needs to focus on, the King James only if it's your number one reader. But if it's just a Bible that's sitting in your library that you have because you're a pastor, but you don't read from it, you don't preach from it, you don't teach from it, okay, you need to shut up about it and keep that to yourself. You don't need to be using the King James and trying to gravitate people away from the King James. If somebody wants to purchase a copy of the King James, that's a number one bestseller. It's still a number one bestseller. And a lot of people, even in this modern day time, they want to read the King James to find out. Instead of taking your word for it, they want to find out for themselves. I wanted to find out for myself. That's why I got myself an SKJV. I want to find out what the King James is saying that everybody's trying to cover up. And I found out. There's a lot in there that everybody's covering up. That's truth. Okay? The New King James is not going to say what it's saying because it's afraid that it'll make you not be able to understand it, or it won't be able to get as many cells. But there's things in that King James that we need to study, that we need to understand. Okay? And I've been blessed to gravitate to some of this stuff. I'm still gravitating to it because it's a lot. But that doesn't mean that that doesn't mean that, the TR is wrong and the King James is just, no. It's there's some things in there that has to deal with culture and the way people talked and responded back in those days that we've left out of our modern text that's very important to biblical philosophy. Okay? And it's good to know these things. Okay? Although, again, I am pro New King James. Okay? But I have a copy of the King James. I have a copy of the SKJV. I have a copy of the MEV. I have a copy of the KJV-ER. I have plenty of copies. You know, I have some different. I have a totally footnoted King James over there. I'm not going to sit there and read to the bottom of the page for every verse I read. Okay, but you know, the hatred towards the King James is just as hypocritical as King James onlyism. Nobody wants to be a King James onlyist, then stop being a critical text onlyist then. Stop hating on the King James. Now they're supposedly giving the King James onlyists a taste of their own money. They're going to use what's supposed to be, you know, talking about the CSB to yell back and be a hypocrite about King James onlyism. That's childish. Don't do that. You're talking about the CSB. You mean to tell me you couldn't find a more standard translation of our modern day to compare it to? You had the, well, Tim Frisk, Mr. Smiley Face over here on the left brought it up. Okay, and he does that every time. He does that with Tim Nichols and Tim Wildsmith and everybody. He does a what do you call it? A Zoom with, or a group video with, or whatever. He always laughs. You say the word KJV, he starts laughing and smiling. It's mockery. It's wrong. It's evil. It's wrong. You need to stop. Because the KJV said what it said in its time, and in its time wasn't nobody laughing. If you laugh at Shakespeare, obviously you'll never do drama. Okay? You have to take the Shakespeare seriously in order to get through the daggone play. Okay? Or you'll be in the play laughing and everybody will be wondering, we paying tickets to see you get up here and act a fool? This needs to stop. This needs to stop. You need to respect the King James for what it is and for how ancient it is. Just like you respect anything else that is still in books and almanacs and all that kind of stuff. Okay? Stop making fun of it. That makes me mad. That's offensive to me. Because I am a TR guy, and as much as I don't read the King James, I understand preservation. It did not come from your critical text, sweetheart. It did not. Okay? Sure, your critical text might be better in some areas and more academic, James Lindsay's favorite word, but it is not the preservation. It's not what God gave us. Thank God for the continuation by the critical text, but it is not the preservation. It might be the continuation of the preservation, but it ain't the preservation. And it's only the continuation of the preservation when we stop making TR Bibles. But with the MEV coming out, fitting between both texts, you're not the preservation, baby. You're not the preservation. You are the modern day Bibles that are missing a lot and say things differently and all like that. Again, there's plenty of millions and thousands of King James lovers out there that are not KJVO that would just swipe past this video the minute you started comparing the KJV to the CSB. There's only really one translation to compare with the KJV, and that's the NKJV. Your critical text has nothing to do with it. It's closest to the TR more than anything. Okay? And it's going to be more superior than anything else you got out there. Why? Because it's the grandfather of all the Bibles that we have out there, including the New King James, including the CSB that we're talking about right here. It's the grandfather of all these Bibles, including the LSB. They're trying to be a King James without being a King James. The ESV is trying to be a King James without being a King James. Okay? It's more superior than all these Bibles. That does not mean it's perfect. That does not mean that I need to read it, but I sure in hell ain't going to make fun of it. and use it to make to be a hypocrite, just like the King James onlyists are being a hypocrite. Two wrongs don't make goddamn right. I get sick of this. It makes me angry. I'm serious. It makes me angry to see people talk about God's word like this. And ain't nobody, okay, between the three of us right here got more hair on their head than I do. Well, he does, but I'm pretty sure there's a bald spot under all that. Okay, look at Tim Frisk and look at me. Okay? Get the heck out of here. We're old. You mean to tell me us old folks can't do better than using the King James to promote the CSB? That's childish. That is childish. Let me continue before this video goes way over an hour.
Say 100 years ago, a lot of language in the King James is just becoming difficult for modern readers, and so you'll get these words in the King James like descry or callops or neesings, churl, chambering. We just don't use that language anymore. What does it mean? And so, but you'll have to give you a couple examples of this, and what I'll do is I'll give you the.
I have a KJVER that tells you what those words mean. Sorry, Mark Ward, but your false friends thing is over. You knew that you needed to end by 2026. By the beginning of 2026, like you said in a recent video, you needed to give KJV onlyism, your fight with KJV onlyism, a break. Okay? Because you know there's enough resources out there, including your own, that helps people understand the KJV. If you're going to make fun of the KJV, why make products that help people understand the KJV? That's a double standard and very hypocritical. Okay? If you're going to make products out there that help people understand the KJV and love it better, why make fun of it? Okay? We have resources, we have tools, and we have Bibles other than the traditional KJV. I got one sitting here less than an arm away from me. That is the most recent update of the KJV, and it's truly KJV. The only people that are hating on it are the KJV onlyists. But you didn't use this Bible. You didn't use the SKJV to talk about, where the CSV is different. Okay? The CSB is going to translate things way better for your understanding than the King James, New King James, SKJV, LSB. You could have used any other Bible than the King James to promote your CSB. But that'd be like taking the the NLT, and comparing it to the CSB. The NLT is going to be more dynamic than the CSB. Somebody could get on here and sit there and try to talk down the CSB with the NLT to promote the NLT. But see, y'all don't do that. Y'all only do that to the TR. Y'all don't do that to CSB Bibles. You don't do that to critical text Bibles. You only do that to Bibles on this side of the wall, on the TR side of the wall. And you really don't touch a New King James. New King James doesn't get talked about. Okay? Now I got a shout out to Tim Frisk, little silly Charlie Brown face over here on the left, that laughs at the King James. You say KJV, he just gets a kick out of it. I think that's ignorant and childish. But I got to shout out to him because he's one of the only ones that actually go into these Bibles and show you verse by verse, show you some comparisons where they, are what they are what they say they are, and how they compare to other Bibles, which I appreciate that. Most people talk all this trash about how wonderful a translation is and don't explain what's so special about the translation. They don't dare open it up and talk about nothing. They're just on here making content, okay, to get likes, subscribers, and views and money. They're not really talking about the translation and what's that have to do with me or you. It bums me out, okay? But I still think for them to use the KJV and talk about it like it's just, use printer paper, you can throw it in the trash now. I think that's just ignorant and childish, and it's very evil, and hopefully they won't stand before God for that.
The King James, and I'll give you the CSB right after, so you'll see what it really means. But in Leviticus 22, verse 22, the King James has blind or broken or maimed or having a wen or scurvy or scabbed. So what does wen, scurvy, or scab mean? And so the CSB will read there blind, injured, maimed, or has a running sore or a festering rash or scabs. So we're trying to make that a little more understandable. The King James in Deuteronomy 22, verse 19, and they shall immerse him in 100 shekels of silver. What does immerse mean? And so the CSB they will also fine him 100 shekels of silver. To immerse is to fine. Or if you want a New Testament example, you have in the King James Matthew 4:18 or 14:8. Give me John the Baptist's head in a charger. This is the King James there. And we just don't use the language anymore, so we would have give me John the Baptist's head on a platter. So those are examples of the archaisms in the King James Version where it just fails to communicate to a modern reader, and increasingly so as our language changes. But some of these archaisms actually lead to inaccuracies in modern English, and that's where it becomes a real problem. So in 1 Kings 11:1, the King James will talk about strange women, and what it means is foreign women. Or you'll have in Nehemiah 13:26 outlandish women, and again, that's
my eloquent Uncle Freddie that brought me up in the Lord and in the King James Bible. We used to argue back and forth about the King James versus the Living Bible, but he knew without looking in the Living Bible. He ain't never read nothing but the King James all his life. He was eloquent. He knew what outlandish women were. He knew what strange women were. I knew what strange women were. I asked him the question, does strange women mean immoral women or foreign women? And he was like, well, in some places it means immoral women, and that's more of the translation. It's not foreign women. Strange women usually means, like if you're talking about the book of Proverbs, the word strange next to women means immoral women. Okay? Now, if you're talking about, further back in time, in the Hebrew, you might be talking about foreign women. But in the book of Proverbs, it's talking about immoral women. Okay? It's not talking about foreign women. It's talking about, but you can usually tell from reading the text whether it's talking about foreign women or, even DeRoy Cruz, this guy right here, as a child knew what them words mean, what them words meant. All you got to do is read the whole chapter and then you go back and say, hey, Uncle Freddie, what do you mean by strange women? Oh, yeah, I thought so. But you mean to tell me, again, out of all these standard translations out here that are going to use the word strange, okay, in certain places, even LSB uses some of the King James, renderings in certain places. You're going to tell me you had to use the King James, you couldn't use anything in the critical text? All these standard versions in the critical text? You got more Bibles on your side of the wall than you do on mine. You going to tell me you couldn't use anything over there to compare to CSB to? This is an attack on the King James. This is what the King James onlyism people are talking about, folks. When they watch videos like this and see you sitting there clowning the King James like it's so hard to understand. But there's kids that understand the King James better than you do. Okay? They know how to ask somebody. They know how to look up a dictionary. There's Bible dictionaries. And there's dictionaries. I remember when I first got into the New King James, I carried a Bible dictionary with me in my briefcase. Well, the King James words were in there as well. It was a regular Bible dictionary. And it had not only the New King James words in there, it had the King James words in there. And most of the words were in there. And if they weren't in there, there were words that weren't in there, just a few here and there, that I had to look up in the dictionary. And they were there. You know, and sometimes you look it up online in the dictionary to tell you, well, in the King James, this word meant blah, 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 blah. Okay? They don't talk about that. They never talk about that on YouTube where the internet will tell you what words mean in the King James versus what they mean today. They'll tell you what those words meant in the King James. It's not like, oh, can't nobody read the King James. The only way you can read the King James is if you're a King James onlyist. That's not true. There's more people who are advocates of the King James than there are people that are King James onlyists. I hate to tell you. I hate to bust your bubble like that, but that's true.
That's foreign women. Or you'll read in 2 Kings 3:9, you're to fetch a compass. Well, it's not that you're supposed to go get a compass, but that you're traveling by an.
Look at that laugh. He think it's funny. It ain't funny.
One of my favorites is in 1 Corinthians 16:13. It says, "Quit you like men." So
we love that, don't we?
Men are known for their quitting. It just means be courageous, but
ridiculous.
quit like men.
Oh. I thought we were supposed to give up.
But or in 1 Thessalonians 5:14, comfort the feeble-minded, and so feeble-minded sounds like they might be unintelligent or something. But so the CSB will translate that as comfort the discouraged. Now, one of the interesting things that your listeners may want to be aware of is that when you look at the King James Version on those archaisms, that was why there's a New King James Version. King James.
Now you want to mention it.
Compare the King James Version with, if you go to a place like BibleGateway.com and you look at those verses that we were just talking about in the New King James Version, you'll find that most of those are updated in a similar way as you'll find in the CSB. So to remove that problem. But there's a second more fundamental problem with the King James Version that really has not been fixed in the New King James Version, because it would mean it'd be just a different translation. And that's the King James Version's reliance on the Greek text that was current from the 16th century and early 17th century. So the King James translators were relying on...
It really kills me. See, I'm glad that I started reading the CSB before I watched this video. Or else I wouldn't read the CSB. Because there's too much talking on here about what's wrong with the TR in the King James Version. Now he's attacking the TR now. He done went past the King James and the New King James. Now he wants to attack the TR. But you and I, in our gray hair, what wasn't around, okay, when they did the TR. So we really don't know. Because preservation took a pause in 1769. We really don't know that. We really don't know what you're talking about here, because critical text came later. How do you know? You don't know. How do you know? You don't know. Because we were doing textual criticism back then. It even says that to the preface of the King James. We were doing textual criticism back then. So how do you know that everything that goes on today is perfect and chewable? It's not. It's just different. That doesn't mean it's perfect. It's just different. Okay? Now he wants to say, well, even the New King James, because the problem with the TR, Okay, this is where I'm glad I started reading the CSB before I watched this video, or I would have never bought a CSB. I'm telling you, because the way he's promoting the CSB, he's turning me against it. He really is. The way he's promoting the CSB, using the King James and clowning the King James to talk about the CSB, he's turning me against the CSB. He really is.
On a Greek Bible that had been put together by the Erasmus, the famous humanist, a little before the time of Luther, but also concurrent with Luther, he put together a text of the Greek New Testament. And I'm going to be talking here most about the Greek New Testament. But it's also called the Textus Receptus. That's how famous Erasmus's text became. So I want to talk a little bit about that, because what people often don't realize is that Erasmus was only working with 6 Greek manuscripts total. And the oldest of those Greek manuscripts was actually only went back to the 11th century. The rest of them are all later. So these were late Greek manuscripts. And keep that in the back of your mind. I think that's an issue, because nowadays we have manuscripts that many manuscripts that go back to the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th centuries. So he's working with much
again. Either a manuscript is from a false religion, okay, or it's a biblical manuscript. Did you prove? There is nobody saying, well, we believe that the Arabs, okay, or the people of Antioch, the Judaics or whatever, tampered with the manuscripts that the King James used or that went into the TR. Nobody's saying that. They're just saying, or later manuscripts. Okay, what's that have to do with the price of tea in China? So what? Are they biblical manuscripts? I don't get it. And later manuscripts that haven't been used means that they were less tampered with. These manuscripts came out looking good compared to what you've been using over and over and over again and passing them all over the place. They found evidence. This is what bothered Westcott and Hort. They found evidence in the manuscripts that came later that was not in the manuscripts that came before. Okay, and Dwayne Green proved that the critical text people are not always truthful in the manuscripts that they use. They use later manuscripts too. They're just being picky about which ones they use. And they use older manuscripts because they're still on this binge and purge that Westcott and Hort gave us the better manuscripts. Now, if something has been X'd out or was contaminated and therefore something's missing, okay, if you're going to sit there and say the King James added all these wonderful verses, all these words and wonderful verses in forms of Scripture, if you're going to sit there and say that King James added all this good stuff, I mean, it's really good, rich soil of stuff that we claim that King James added, or that was just left in the margins, okay, and wasn't in the text. Well, if you got a manuscript where stuff is blotted out or was damaged, you need something in the margin to come from the founding fathers to put in there to fill that void. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay? This is the problem I have with people going anywhere but other than, okay, the King James might be hard for you to understand, use a different Bible. Okay, stop. That's it. As far as the texts and the manuscripts, you are messing with the side of preservation. You are not the preservation, my friend. Preservation didn't start in the 2000s, and it didn't start in 1901. Preservation started in the 1400s and got better and better and better as we used the same text for centuries. before we ever went critical, before we ever went Westcott and Hort, before we ever went Alexandrian. I don't care how bad you think the King James is or what you think. It is the preservation. Sorry, but it's the preservation. It's what God gave us long before all these other religions and all these other philosophies came in there tampering with our Bible. It's what God gave us. Sorry, but that's just the way it is. There's no way of getting around that. And again, shout out to all the people that are King James advocates. I didn't say King James only. I said King James advocate. I go to church with these people. There ain't no King James only is in my church, but we are a King James church. Both of the churches I go to are King James church. And there's very little King James only people in there. And there are several people that are sitting in the pews that read from other translations other than the King James. But this guy, his problem here is with King James onlyism. It ain't with the King James. Okay? Your CSB wouldn't be making any sales if people... I wish they stopped smoking weed. There's people smoking weed in the back. It's coming through my house. I can smell it. It's seeping right through my kitchen window. There's people smoking weed back there. My next door neighbor goes back there and smokes weed. And then that's what the noise you heard earlier. She smokes weed back there and then gets crazy. I think she smokes weed in her house, coming through my walls. But anyway, in closing, the smell of weed coming in here just ruined what I was getting ready to say.
Later, much later. Your manuscript, not many of them have this tendency to place in his Greek text readings that actually came from the Latin Vulgate, which was put together by Jerome in the 4th century as a translation of the Latin. So one place you can see it pretty easily in a modern translation is if you go to Acts chapter 8, verse 36. This is that story with Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch. And so you'll read, as they were traveling down the road, they came to some water, and the eunuch said, "Look, there's water. What would keep me from being baptized?" Now, if you're looking at a modern translation, you won't have a verse 37, or what they'll do is they'll put the verse 37 into the footnotes down below to tell you that you're wondering why this verse is missing. Well, it's actually an insertion into Erasmus's Greek text from the Latin Vulgate. And so what you're missing there is the words, "And Philip said, if you believe with all thine heart, you may." And he answered, "I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God." So the eunuch's confession there is highlighted in the Vulgate. Erasmus inserted it. We'll do it also in a passage in 1 John chapter 5, where if you're looking at it in the footnotes, in a lot of Bibles, you can see there's some added language. It becomes this like a three witnesses passage is what's called. But the main thing we want to be aware of, though, when you're looking at those 6 manuscripts that Erasmus was using, that's going to be the basis for the King James, is that they all come from what's called a family of manuscripts. It's what's called the Byzantine text. It's a text type. It's kind of like, my family's all related. So if you did a genetic analysis, you'd find that our kids are.
He needs to sit down and have a talk with Dwayne Green. Dwayne Green would have him stuttering for a solid hour over his words. He's about to go in here and sit there and say that the Byzantine text, now he's going after the Byzantine? Oh my God. I know Dwayne Green ain't too crazy about you if he knows the content you're talking about.
Are related to me and to my wife, and so there's a genetic relationship in our family. Well, you could do the same thing with ancient manuscripts. You can see by their characteristics that some are related to others, and they form a family. So there are actually 3 ancient text types or families. There is the Byzantine text, which Erasmus is using. His Greek manuscripts were all from that one family. And that's because there's not a lot of familiarity with the Western text type, another family of ancient manuscripts of the New Testament, and then especially a third one called the Alexandrian text type. And that wasn't really recovered until the 19th century. And we came across one in the Vatican, another of the New Testament at St. Catherine's Monastery on Mount Sinai. But these were their own distinct families of texts. And so Erasmus did not have access to those two other families.
Tim Frisk is wondering, why are you spending so much time? As silly as he is, he's wondering, like, why are you spending so much time? I didn't bring you here to explain to me the history of the Bible. I already know the history of the Bible. Now, I've heard this guy, this Andrew Doss, on other videos, and he did a great job. There's another video I watched a few days ago where he was talking about the CSB, and I might have even recorded it, parts of it. It was a good video. But this one here, he's like really going all out up against the King James, and he's really going up against the TR. Like, what does that have to do with the CSB? The CSB came later. How old is the CSB? It's fairly new. We already been through this we already have all these critical text Bibles selling like hotcakes. Way more than any King James or New King James Bible is going to sell. The CSB is selling good right now. This video is 2 years old. Where's his brain at? Like, you just now talking about this? I've heard it 100 times. I'm tired of hearing about it. I really am. You know, you're supposed to be on here to talk about the CSB. Are you trying to convince the world by attacking the King James to buy more CSBs? Like, what's going on here, man? Like, you're just talking about the TR. You're not talking about the CSB. The video, Conversations with Dr. Andrew Doss, CSB Translation Oversight Committee. Why are we talking about the King James Oversight Committee? You're supposed to be talking about the CSB Oversight Committee. Really?
Different readings than you have in the Byzantine text. Now, the Byzantine text had become, by Erasmus's day, what's also called the majority text in large measure. So it's just most of the Greek texts you came across were from this. It became a majority text. But there's a little bit of irony in calling it the majority text because it's a different majority text, even though it's Byzantine in the 16th century, than it would have been in, let's say, the 9th century when the Byzantine text first became the majority text type. It wasn't the majority text type prior to the 9th century. So people often don't realize that. The majority text prior to that would have been Alexandrian in the first few centuries of the Christian movement. But we didn't know. And so one of the nice things about modern translations is that they're drawing on that full body, that full witness. And what you'll find in modern translations, we'll ask ourselves, well, then which family is more original than another? And so we'll apply certain principles in translation that the best reading is one, let's say, that can explain the emergence of the other readings. And so if you're reading in Mark 1, 2-3, it'll say in many manuscripts, as it is written in the prophet, in Isaiah the prophet. But then in other manuscripts, it'll say, as it was written in the prophets. Well, what's interesting is that you have a quote there that's partially from Isaiah, but it's also partially from Malachi. And so you can see then that some manuscripts would want to explain this. You know,
which makes the TR a better translation. Because most translations, including the CSB, says that it's from Isaiah. Okay? But no. The TR was smart, said prophets, because one of the verses is from Malachi, and partially the other one, just a part of it is from Isaiah. I know what verse he's talking about. I'm going to stop here. Because he's like on this KJV, hate all other translations or texts. you know, to make the CSB look good. I love the CSB. I love the CSB. I got my copy right here. I spent some time in it today. You know what I mean? I love the CSB. It's one of my favorites. But thank God I bought this because of Tim Frith's other videos that I watched, where he was comparing the CSB to the NIV and things of that. But this kind of stuff right here is trash. Okay? This is bad YouTube right here. He's here to talk about the CSB. That's what he should be talking about. Not giving us a lesson on the Bible because the CSB came later. Let me say that again. Not giving us a lesson on the Bible because the CSB came later. We got hundreds of translations that are new and have passed since the CSB. Just too late to talk about this. Talk about the CSB, that it comes from what you think are the original languages, and that's it. I don't understand where the KJV has anything to do with this conversation. Okay? If you're going to compare anything to the King James, you can compare anything to the King James, and it's going to sound better because the King James is ancient. It paused at 1769. That's a long time ago. Trust me, at 1769, wasn't nobody laughing. There wasn't no Tim Frisk around for him to be laughing. Wasn't nobody talking about in 1769, well, see, the King James, and it used these later manuscripts, and blah, 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 because there wasn't any other Bible around at that time. There wasn't no other text around but the TR. We need to wake up some people from the grave and say, hey, how did you survive all these years using a TR? Because these modern day people seem to think it was such a problem for the Christian church for the TR to even exist. I'm glad. You know, it's just like the LSB. I'm glad that I watch other people talk about the LSB. And that I bought one just to have it, and I start liking it, and I'm like, wow. Because I'm telling you, James White used to bring an LSB to every debate. Since the LSB came out. And he would bring an LSB to every debate and just trash the King James, saying that the King James is just wrong on all parts, and there's no other. It didn't come from anything. It didn't come from any manuscripts. It didn't come, and some of that is misquoted. It's not true. Okay, and he would have that LSB, and that made me hate the LSB until I seen people that said, yeah, John MacArthur, here he comes again with another one. He already put Calvinism into the ESV, and now here comes the LSB. But I'm reading and I'm like, wow, this is really different. So I'm looking up this LSB online, and I'm looking at it on my YouVersion and all like that. And I'm like, you know what? I need to get this version because it seems pretty decent. But listening to John MacArthur trash the King James, listening to Mark Ward, James White, different one trash the King James, I didn't want to buy an LSB. And if I had to listen to this knucklehead, now in his other videos he did good, but in this one here he's not even considering this CSB. How long is he going to keep rattling on before he starts to talk about what's good about the CSB? All he's talking about is what's bad about the TR and the King James and Erasmus. He mentioned the New King James for a minute. Then he said, oh, well, even with the New King James, see, coming from that text, Any of y'all that think that the TR isn't an inferior text, please stop coming to my channel. I don't want to see you on my channel. The TR is not an inferior text. It is the preservation. It is what God gave us. Okay? It is what God gave us. God didn't give us the Bible in 1881. He didn't give it to us in 1901, and he sure in hell didn't give it to us in the 2000s. He gave us the Bible in the 1400s, going all the way back to the Wycliffe, and working its way down to the 1769 King James. And then there was a pause until the New King James came out. Then there was another pause until 2024 when the MEV came out and the SKJV came out. We got a New King James, the MEV, and the SKJV, and you still picking on the King James. This is ignorant, rude, and childish. It needs to stop. I would love to sit down with Tim Frisk and this guy and Tim Nichols and different ones, okay? Because the King James is the King James and New King James is the New King James. The CSB is the CSB. Okay? There are plenty of people out there that can read the King James and preach from it, and you wouldn't even be able to distinguish between someone preaching from the King James and someone preaching from the CSB. You wouldn't even be able to make a difference. Because they know what they're reading. If they didn't know what they were reading, they wouldn't be reading the King James. That's the difference between a King James activist or a King James advocate and a King James onlyist. That's the difference. You're so bent on King James only, you think the only people to read the King James are the King James onlyist cult. You're not thinking about the advocates that read from it. And they understand the preservation and why it's important. I just got done listening to a Nick Sayers video. My only problem with Nick Sayers is he thinks the King James is perfect. That's not true. King James is not perfect. The King James is not perfect. The King James is not without any errors. I know that just from reading it, let alone listen to people talk about how certain verses got in the Bible and stuff like that. But it has less errors in it than a lot of your critical text versions. And the way you're reading the Hebrew and Greek, I have to question the Hebrew and Greek. How does the word Elohim in 2026, in 2020, back in the days when the TR was created, nobody looked at the word Elohim and put that in there with God's little g, meaning idols. Everybody knew that when you say Elohim, it doesn't go any lower than angels. You're talking about God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, and legions of angels that fear God, not Satan and his legions of demons. But now today the word Elohim, this is the problem with the Hebrew and the Greek of modern day texts. That now the word Elohim can mean, okay, so you're telling me that God created, it was literally God, Elohim, in Genesis, that created the heavens and the earth. But when we get to Psalms chapter 8, the word Elohim means something different. It means that it could be other things. It means that it could be human beings. It means that it could be, you're not sure what it means. Or it could mean that men are gods. Or it could mean something else. Or it could mean angels. The modern texts are not sure. But the New King James is sure. The King James is sure. The Geneva is sure what that means. That's why I say, and all y'all that follow my channel, listen to me real good. God has blessed us to move on from the King James with both its own TR and the critical text. We're able to move away from the King James. That's fine. But to sit there and use KJV onlyism to be hypocritical yourself and hate on the King James, apart from King James onlyism, makes you just as bad and just as occultic as they are. It doesn't make you a better person. This video was supposed to be about the CSB, and what do we have here? He spent 20-some minutes, and he's still talking about everything except the CSB, mainly what's wrong with the TR. He's still talking about Erasmus and the KJV in 20-some minutes. The video's about the CSB. Okay. I'm out here. You can watch this video if you want to. Okay. I'm offended by this. I shouldn't be, but I am. This offended me. And I'm going to watch the rest of the video. But for you, conversation with Dr. Andrew Das, CSB Translation Oversight Committee. By Tim Friss, of course. This is Tim Friss right here. Mr. Sillyface over here that every time you say the word KJV starts laughing. Okay, I don't think nothing's funny. I think the KJV is older and a better person than your grandfather, okay, and more superior than any Bible you got out there, okay, because of the text it comes from. But when I read any of the Bibles that come from the critical text, I have to accept what they say, even though they're all different than each other and different than the TR. I have to accept what they say. If I'm going to like the CSB, all the places where it differentiates, from other Bibles, I have to say, okay, well, that's one place where the CSB is really different. I have to do the same thing, oh my God, with the NLT. I have to do the same thing with the LSB, the NASB. I have to accept that they are their own Bibles. I really couldn't do that with the NET and the NIV. It just, too much differences, too much. But I accept that these Bibles are their only Bibles. They made decisions just like the King James people made decisions. It's okay for them to make decisions that don't follow naturally with the Hebrew and Greek. But it was wrong for King James to make decisions. The King James made decisions. So did y'all. Everybody makes decisions because you can't translate the Hebrew and Greek perfectly into the text in English. Everybody made decisions. Not just the King James, not just the TR. It makes me mad when you act like you're so much better than the King James, but yet you're making decisions. And you can get anybody on YouTube to get on there and say, well, your Bible is imperfect. They do it to the LSB and the ESB every day. There's always somebody, almost cuss, complaining and moaning about the ESV and the LSB. Which I like the LSB. The ESV, okay, I can't have both the ESV and the LSB. Both of them trying to be King James, and the LSB is doing a better job than the ESV. Okay? But I just can't have both of those, and I've chosen the CSB. I'm figuring, why do I need to read the Berean or the NIV when I have a CSB? They're trying to be like the CSB. So why do I need to read those? That's why I don't really get into the NIV or the Berean. Because I like the CSB. But man, give me too many hours listening to this poop right here. This is poop. I mean, we're going on 24. We're going on 25 minutes and still counting. Okay? When do we talk about CSB without putting it up against the King James? This whole video is like, even Friss is starting to look like, okay, dude, I brought you here to talk about the CSB. We had a good comedy show, what you talking about the King James and how archaic it is. When are you going to talk about the CSB? Bad YouTube. This is bad YouTube. This is bad production. You're not going to sell more CSBs doing this crap. Okay? Thank God, again, that I did not watch this at the beginning, because I would have never bought a CSB if I had listened to this guy talk in this particular video. Thank God I bought my CSB a year ago, before I watch videos like this. Because this is just... If the CSB and the King James is that much different, maybe I shouldn't buy a CSB. If they're that different the way he's saying. God, they're that different? Wait a minute. You're offended? You're that offended as a CSB translator? You're that offended by the King James? And the TR? And Erasmus? He done went, oh my goodness. Okay. Thank God I watched. Thank God I got my CSB before all this. Thank God. And some other translations like the LSB. Thank God I didn't listen to James White, because I would have never got an LSB listening to James White. Because all he did was the same thing this guy's doing. Just hating on the TR, Erasmus, King James. Okay, like they weren't here before all these other Bibles. Like people didn't serve textual criticism for 400 and some years before the CSB ever thought about being born. It's ignorant and stupid. It really is. Thank you for watching, folks. But I love the CSB. Again, I love the CSB. It's one of my favorites. I read it almost every day. I'm not going to let this guy here, who happens to be on the committee, I'm not going to let him, steer me in the wrong direction. But his hatred for the King James makes me have hatred for any modern text. And if you've been watching my channel, I've canceled my hatred for these texts, because I found good things in them. Still, that doesn't give him a right to talk dirty about the TR. Okay? All them Bibles out there that came before the CSB, he had to go to the King James. He couldn't compare the CSB with none of them Bibles that are already out. He had to go over here on the other side of the wall and pick a fight. I'm out of here. Thank you for watching, folks. Thank you for your time.